everyone says to me, "Oh, Hackney's a really nice area." And I find that kind of funny because when I was growing up there, you quite literally couldn't pay people to live there. Whereas now it's, a revolving door of whoever can afford the rent.
Now, to Professor Green, who is best known as a rap artist, he is also, though, a very, very, I think, significant mental health campaigner is the right way to describe him. He's got together with the Post Office and with British Gas to try to give some advice about how to get through the cost of living crisis, and he knows a bit about this himself. Good afternoon to you. How are you?
Afternoon, how are you both?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Okay, now I want you to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about why you're prepared to get involved with this campaign, because they are, I mean, on the face of it, British Gas are part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Seemingly to people, but I'm here to talk on behalf of the British Gas Energy Trust, which is an independent charitable trust. I can't speak for British Gas. And the reason I was willing to take part in this primarily is because I think there's a lot of people that need to access support that have no idea there is even any support out there that they can access, whether that's for previous and existing energy debt that they're scared they're wandering into, even if it's just for the need for. So basically British Gas and Post Office have teamed up to launch British Gas and Post Office pop-ups. It's the second phase, which is upscaled. They hope to have 40 pop-ups in place in 23 locations by January, and it's somewhere that the British Gas Energy Trust are supporting local charities, local independent charities that already exist in these communities. So it's not just British Gas and Post Office landing in a community and expecting people to trust them. They're supporting charities that already exist in these communities to further support people in the communities who need help the most.
Okay,
For
I'm
me,
sorry.
using sorry, I was just going to say, for me, being able to use my voice for something other than myself is quite important. I've done it for quite a long time, especially as you mentioned around mental health, not least of all because of my history with it. It's plagued my family. My dad took his own life. His brother took his own life 2 years before. And, with something like energy debt with any debt comes shame,
Yeah.
right? And shame leads to feelings of worthlessness, to isolation. And when that happens, people are not going to reach out for the support that they can access. And things manifest when you're isolated and left to your own devices. Things get worse and worse when they stay between your ears.
Well, that is the toughest thing, isn't it? You have to self-identify as someone who's struggling and needs help.
Which for the first time ever, there's people, perhaps not the first time ever, but a lot of people for the first time ever, even in dual income households, are finding themselves in situations where they're having to access food banks in order to be able to provide food for their family, despite both of them working. There's this archetypal image of someone who is going through poverty, and it's not accurate. It's completely inaccurate. You've got people who work to earn their poverty, who work. My nan, when I was growing up, listen, I'm not here pleading poverty, by the way, right? I'm in a really privileged situation, but that's not how I grew up. I was born to my mother, who was 16, my dad was 18, my mum still lived at home. There was actually 6 of us in a 3-bedroom flat when I was born. And I experienced secondhand, by way of my nan, who became my legal guardian, energy debt. There wasn't the term energy debt then. There was no apparent energy crisis. It was just debt and hard times. My nan worked 3 jobs a day, and we still lived in poverty. And I think it's quite scary, especially for people that have, because there's a lot to be said for people that I grew up around on my estate. If this was to pop up, it would just be something else that we have to handle. I think there's something to be said for people that are used to encountering these kinds of stresses. Not that it's a pleasant life, but they're better versed in how to handle such stress. Whereas people that have never encountered poverty before are all of a sudden thrust into a situation which they don't understand.
Yeah, that's such a good point to make, actually. The people who move into that kind of space that, as you've alluded to, you know a lot about. Can you just describe for us what it's like as a kid to know that you're in a family which is struggling to decide between heating and eating? I think it's that kind of personal experience that we just can't hear enough about at the moment in order to get home to people like Jane and I, who, to be honest, we are hopefully empathetic, but we are never going to really understand what that feels like.
Firstly, I think empathy is all important. I don't think people necessarily have to understand in order to empathize and in order to help. It's important that people are empathetic. How does it feel as a child growing up in a household where there is money troubles and struggles, and and hard times, it feels horrible. And selfishly, you know, my nan was going through a hell of a lot more than I was, but as a product of that, or as a byproduct of that, I was anxious. I was stressed. I was taking on all of that in the household. You know, my nan was coming home after working 3 jobs a day, and with hindsight, I understand now why she would be tired, why she would be upset, why she would seem to be angry at the littlest things. It's because she was exhausted. She was stressed. There was never any let up. There wasn't any period of her day where she was able to sit down and even take a breath. And there was no British Gas Post Office pop up. There was no support. There was no one to phone. There was no one to go and see in the local community to sit down and talk to by people that she knew if she had the time to do it. And that's why I think it's really important that people do understand there is support out there and that they access that support rather than hiding. It's a sad thing, you know, people see a letter from perhaps British Gas to inform them about grants of up to £1,600 for existing energy debt that they don't open because they're so petrified to open a bill to find out that they owe more money.
Do you think that perhaps back when you were growing up that there was more support from neighbours and from the wider community? Do you think people were keener to help each other out back then?
I don't know if they were keener. I just think there was less division. I think it was a much more open door policy. There was, I mean, disparity didn't seem to be as prominent as what it does. It feels ever growing now. Everyone says to me, "Oh, Hackney's a really nice area," and I find that kind of funny because when I was growing up there, you quite literally couldn't pay people to live there, whereas now it's, you know, a revolving door of whoever can afford the rent. Um, Unless, of course, you're growing up on an estate there, where it's probably worse to be growing up in Hackney now than it was when I grew up there.
What, you think levels of deprivation are worse than in your youth and childhood?
I do, yeah, and I think there's also when I talk about disparity, it's the gentrification that's taken place, which of course offers more jobs and opportunity. But how many people can actually afford to frequent the new shops? And you know, my dad worked in a greengrocers when I was growing up. We shopped in the greengrocers, the butchers, and the fishmongers because we didn't have much money. Nowadays, if look at Victoria Park in Hackney, it's got a fishmongers and it's got a butchers and it's got a greengrocers that you have to be on a relatively high wage to even consider shopping at because it's so expensive. And now, because of those things, it's called Victoria Park Village.
Yes, there's always a village somewhere.
There's a lot of people having their nose pushed up against the window. That's a pretty harsh reality, if you ask me.
Yeah.
What would you do if you were in charge to try and bridge that gap? Or is it not actually up to people who are in charge? It's up to all of us to actually join in, see what's in front of us.
I really like the second part of that question. The first part was edging towards politics, and I'm not a politician. And it was a huge question, which I'm quite nervous of because I don't have the answers. As far as the second part, is it up to all of us? Yes, I think the problem is that people look at poverty as a problem for those who suffer it, like so many things, when actually it's a societal problem that affects all of us. But I mean, don't get me wrong, the results of it are anything but perfect. But to me, it seems like somewhat of a perfect storm. We've still got the hangover from COVID and everything that brought about. And we're now hit with a completely different set of problems. But again, something that most people probably haven't encountered in their lifetime.
Professor Green, what are you professor of?
So I'm not a real professor. Credentials out. Yeah, sorry guys. A bit like Dr. Fox. He's not a doctor.
Well, he's
Dr.
not
Dre,
a fox either. No,
He's not several other things. But anyway, carry
you know,
on.
for the amount of times
he's
that
not
I've
in
used that
work.
reference, no, it was funny. It made me laugh. No one's ever said that. For the amount of times that I've said it's a bit like Dr. Fox. He's not a doctor. I've never had anyone say a noisy fox.
No.
So you did make me laugh. It was funny. I
Yeah.
think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't actually want to make any humour about that, man, because I think
No,
we'll
move on very swiftly.
Yes.
Sorry, probably a bad person to reference.
No, please don't worry at all. Just before we talk a little bit more about your other work, can you just let people know how they would be able to access the British Gas Energy Trust and Post Office collaboration that is happening imminently?
Definitely. Beyond popping down to your local post office to find out if there is a pop-up in your area, you can also find British Gas and Post Office on Twitter and Facebook to find out if there's a British Gas Post Office pop-up happening near you.
Okay. And just to your point about people who are experiencing a kind of a shame and feelings that they haven't experienced before, what advice would you give to them when they walk in, you know, and they're nervous about asking for help and stuff? Just a little pointer as to what they might have in their heads.
Good thing about accessing one of these pop-ups is that as I said before, it's charities that already exist in these areas that deal with people in these communities day in, day out. Even if what you need is just respite, a place to go and talk to someone about everything that is occurring that you think you may be on top of, but you want to make sure. Some people don't get the space in their day to even do that. And so what you can expect is to walk into a place where you can talk privately and in confidence with someone who can help you with anything that you're worrying about around your energy debt, energy crisis, cost of living crisis. There's so many types of debt, whether it's data poverty or energy poverty. It just seems like there is just so much at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I was just thinking, in terms of your own life, you're a relatively recent dad, aren't you?
I am, yeah. He's
Yeah.
20 months old tomorrow, and I cannot wait until he turns 2, so I don't have to talk in months anymore.
Yes,
Said I would
quite.
never talk in weeks, and then I would never talk in months, and lo and behold, I've done both.
Right. Well, I was going to say to you, you're through the worst. It's not true, because you're
No,
nowhere near.
it's not, is it?
You're nowhere near the teenage years. But on the whole, how has it been for you? I notice actually that I think there's a panorama on tonight about male mental health after a child is born, which perhaps it's not panorama, but there's certainly a TV show on tonight. I'll find out exactly what it is and where it is. But this is something that a lot of men do struggle with, isn't it? I mean, women struggle too, but men don't do without suffering at this time.
Not at all. I started an Instagram based around that, to be honest, and just to try and give a more real and honest account around parenting, called the Unlikely Dads Club. Obviously, women are not just welcome, they're encouraged to join in as well, because we need open conversation in order to help things be better and help people be better prepared. When I was one of the first walks I went on with my son, Slemaine, in the pram, a dad shouted out to me, "Congratulations," from the other side of the road. I went, "Cheers." He went, "Welcome to the Truth Club." I went, "What are you on about?" Don't worry, you'll find out. And I did, found out very quickly. And I definitely struggled at points, and I'm hoping I'm through the worst of that now. But not just because of childhood trauma and things that happened in my past, and my dad not being present, and then my dad not being alive, and all of the things that I thought I'd already processed and dealt with, that then had to deal with a different aspect of when my son was born, because they all come flooding back. But because of really seemingly obvious things like the sleep deprivation, which makes it hard to rationalize, it can cause friction between you and your partner. You're both trying to do everything instead of tag teaming, which is a great bit of advice someone gave us a little way down the line. It's difficult. If I was to explain it in 2 words, it's wonderful and stressful, and it's more wonderful than it is stressful, but it is blooming stressful, and people can be stressful, and people are scared to say that because they don't want anyone to think that maybe they shouldn't have had a kid, or maybe it's completely normal to be stressed, and all the things that people get stressed about generally are unspoken about. Because everyone just wants to walk around saying, "Oh my God, it changed my entire life." 100%. By default, it changes your entire life, because you have another person to consider in absolutely all of your decisions. But it doesn't just change your life and make it giddy and happy all of the time. That's not parenting. I would say it's not for the faint-hearted.
And there's a kind of caricature as well of the new dad, which I think a lot of people would now regard as really unhelpful. It's the kind of useless person, fainting in the delivery room, doesn't know what to do, spare part in the household and all that kind of stuff. It must feel quite hard to be on the receiving end of that, to be honest.
Yeah, so like where I've literally been, and this has been really fortunate. It's definitely time to get back to work, and that coincides with Slemaine about to start nursery. But being a stay-at-home dad, I've met a lot of fathers who are in the same situation. Some of who, forwent their job so as their partner could go back to work after they'd finished breastfeeding, and so they were doing what people still in our society sadly would consider to be the woman's job, which is entirely unhelpful, because then what you get is, oh, you're helping mum out as if you're not a parent. You're both parents. You don't help your partner out. You look after your child. You're both parents. It doesn't, like, that to me is just crazy talk. Like, you're not just an add-on. You're not just help. You're a parent.
Yeah, but this isn't taught, is it? It's never discussed at school. You just left to blunder through it.
And yes, and you do, but I tell you what, by hook or by crook, generally, I think you do blunder your way through it. And because my son was born in COVID, we didn't have any support network whatsoever. My mum wasn't close enough. My nan is elderly now. My partner's mother was a frontline worker and her sister was a frontline worker. So all of the people that would have otherwise been support for us couldn't be. We couldn't access play groups. We couldn't access childcare, any of those things. So it was just us. And it was really, really difficult. But in the time since those things have been available to us and play groups have been open, going to play groups and just being able to know that if your child walks over to the other corner, there's another parent watching, and you can spend those hours while they're playing and they're engaging with other children in a healthy fashion as they should be. You can stand there and just complain to another parent if you want, and it really helps.
It's bliss.
It's what many female friendships have been
you
built
feel
on
so
for years.
And you feel like you're in it. Exactly. You feel like you're in it alone at times, and you're really not. And I just wish that we would have had access to more of that, because I think it would have done both the health of our relationship and separately our mental health, the world of good.
Well, I think your honesty is really appreciated, Stephen. Thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Professor Green, take care of yourself. I should say that programme, Becoming Dad, is actually on BBC One tonight at 8:30, if that intrigues you.
Well searched.
Thank
and
you.
I think he is a professor of many things, isn't he? So we're just granting that status.
I welcome he's very frank, and I think he's really honest about some quite difficult things.
And thoughtful.
Yeah.
It's all good to hear.